Have you ever had a revelation in your life where you realized that you had been influenced by someone unknowingly in your past? And I, what I'm trying to do here is I've over the years discovered two major influences that I didn't know at the time I was being influenced. And I look back on it, I'm kind of like, wow, I can see paths in my life that it was good that they were a part of it. But not only that, I'm glad I took the time to think about it. And I wonder, I guess maybe not everybody does that. Maybe not everybody looks back at their life and says, this was a big influence. Now, I say hidden influence. And what I mean by that is I don't want you to pick, I want you to think about your influences, but don't think about what sounds nice, right? We all want to give credit to people we love. My grandmother, my dad, just, my family, all those things. The Bible, God, all those things are great in their own time. We'll put it that way. I'm talking about genuine introspection in really looking back and saying, wow, that person or that thing that person did had an impact on my life. And I didn't even know it. So I'm going to pick two from my own life. I'm going to give you some stories you might like. Of course, I've got a cup of coffee. That's important. The all important cup of coffee. And maybe you could, I'm hoping my story here will kind of influence you to think about what happened with you. Maybe something like this is in your life and you don't really realize it. And I kind of think about it every once in a while. Okay, first person in their work that influenced me is Gary Gygax. Who is that? Gary Gygax invented Dungeons and Dragons. Now, I was, little story time here. I was a kid. It was around the time Indiana Jones was out, so it must have been around 1980. And I know that because my friends and where I lived at the time. And this guy said, I know this other guy that lives down the street, and he plays this game called Dungeons and Dragons. And he explained the game to me, and we made up our own version of it. And off and on throughout the year, and it's always been off and on. It's never been a sort of, I just play D&D. I mean, I did it for a long time, especially in the 90s, but I'm saying generally in life, it's like I play it for a few years and stop, play it for a few years and stop, play it for a few years and stop. Now, when I went to seminary, I started learning about public speaking and preaching. It became very obvious that there were parallels between that process and Dungeons and Dragons. And let me explain that. Now, first thing is this. Let me talk about the Satanic Panic. And I'll keep this brief. It's just that there's this thing out there about how Dungeons and Dragons was played in dark corners and in basements where nobody could see you, and everybody was afraid you were a Satanist. And I've heard some pretty extreme things said about this from people that probably weren't there. There was a satanic panic, but that's really just the name of it. I remember when I first started playing it, my grandmother bought me one of the books, and she's like, now this isn't real magic. I have a friend of mine at work that said, to be careful. And I was like, yeah. And it was fine. That was as close as I got to the Satanic Panic. The fact of the matter is, it was a very open thing that people did in the hallways of schools and everything. I don't believe a lot of what you hear about that. Maybe getting people to play, some people would judge you for doing it, but it wasn't really that big of a deal. It's been made, bigger hay's been made out of it today than it really was, in my opinion. But one of the things you do if you're not aware of how to play the game, essentially it's an asymmetrical relationship between the game master and the players. The game master is trying to keep, he's refereeing several things. They're refereeing the rules, but they're also refereeing the story. They're trying to keep the players sort of in line. And then you have the players who just play the characters in the story. And they have rules governing what their characters can do and cannot do. And as their characters advance, they get more advantages and so forth. And the game has evolved dramatically over the years, more towards the role-playing element as opposed to the mechanics. But it was very interesting. As a game master, you had to do a lot of preparation, especially back in the 80s and 90s. You had to essentially read, if you didn't do this, your game suffered. You wanted to do some reading. You wanted to do, and I didn't do a ton of reading. Like I said, I've always been a bad reader, but I did do some. But I had to do some preparation. And there was a sense where you had to sit there and really think hard about what story, what direction you wanted the story to go in. It didn't always have to be like set in stone, but you could referee it towards that angle. And you had to do, if you were wise, you did research. And when it came time to prepare this to the players, you had to be aware of who the players were, what they liked, right? What kind of motivated them to play. And you also had to think about their characters. You know, how does this fit into the story of their characters? Now, when I was in seminary, it was amazing to me the parallels between game mastering and preaching. Amazing. They're so similar. You have to be able to read the Bible. You have to be able to understand what the Bible's telling you, but you also, there's a little bit of creative process going on. And what I mean by that is, and this would be true for any public speaking, you have to be able to take that, what you're studying and researching, and relay it in a way that makes it listenable. People have to be able to hear what you're saying. And a lot of times that's done with stories. And by the way, in the Bible, you see a lot of things presented to you as a story. Jesus did a lot of that. So that process is the same. The public speaking, the being aware of your audience, all that is there in D&D. It's there. It's all there. And I remember thinking, man, it made being a preacher easier because it's just so similar. I've said if I had a preaching class, I guess even today in a seminary, you couldn't assign Dungeons and Dragons. People would just be like, what? But I would suggest that players actually, especially people who had never done it, actually do it. At least from the game mastering side of it, because they would be preparing themselves for something that can be quite intimidating, getting in front of a lot of people. Being able to speak to them and knowing your audience, being, as Michael Jordan said, preparation removes fear, and anything you can do to get better at public speaking is a good thing, especially if you take it serious and want to do it well. All right, second influence. Moving along here. All right, I'll start this with the story. I think that'll be more appealing. So when I was a kid, I hope you're drinking your coffee. I loved movies. I can't tell you how much I loved them. I mean, I loved them. And I wanted just to be in a theater and see a movie. I would sometimes be excited just to be in a theater and watching a movie. I would sit there and think, I'd get halfway through the film and think, I still have another probably hour at least. You know, just being there, enjoying a movie. Now, as you get older, and I'm not saying I didn't think movies were bad. There were some movies I thought was bad. I remember thinking Dune in 1984 was really boring and bad. But I remember the biggest hype film was Batman with Michael Keaton and Jack Nicholson. That was 1989. And I waited like 2-3 years for this movie. And this is it was getting a lot of hype. It finally came out theaters. I couldn't wait. I didn't always get to go to theaters, so I got to go. And I almost fell asleep. It was so boring. I've watched it again since then, only like once. I couldn't finish it. It was so boring. And I was just like, no way, this movie's bad. After all these years, I can't believe it. Now, I don't know if it was me growing up or if it was my experiences, but one of the things that these particular influencers did for me was change the way I watched movies. And that's Gene Siskel and Roger Ebert. They didn't just do that, though. I'm appreciative to this day of those guys because they basically influenced me to think more. And they didn't accept the idea that you go to a theater and turn your mind off. And to this day, I'm grateful to those two guys for that. Another thing I'm grateful to those two guys for is I couldn't go see movies. And Sunday nights, Siskel and Ebert came on, and they had movie trailers and clips that you can only see on their show. I'm pretty sure you can only see them on their show. So they would. I listened to one of the producers talk about it and said they got special clips for their show. Anyway, so I couldn't wait to watch Siskel and Ebert. I wanted to see, but what I didn't know was happening is they were influencing me. These two guys would just go in. It was like I'd relate it to someone who like loves sports, right? They don't just watch sports; they talk about it. And these guys, they sat there and really thought about movies, like thought about them. And in the 90s, I remember me and several groups of friends will go to movies like sometimes twice a week. And you could bet we were up to all hours of the night talking about that movie, debating it, discussing it, and thinking about it. And we didn't just watch the movie and say, that was good and leave, or that was bad and leave. No, we would talk, sometimes some heated conversations over coffee, almost every time. We all drink coffee, but just long talks into the night about movies. Just so much fun. And that stuff sharpens you. It sharpens you to now when someone tells you something, you think about what they're saying. You pay close attention to the words they're using. You think about what you've said and the words you're using. And you watch a movie, and that means also that you don't like every movie you see anymore. A movie you would have liked when you were 14, some adults never grow out of that, and others, and I don't know if I want to use the words grow out, but you get the idea. You kind of go, why did I like that? And you look at it again and you go, wow, that's so cheesy. I should have done this. And, you know, that's you as a person gaining something from that art form. And that is much better than being amused. You know what the etymology for the word amusement? It's really interesting. I'm going to end it here. It comes from the Greek. You've heard the term muse, right? The muses are inspiration in the arts, right? So you can think. It's thinking. But means without, okay? So amuse means without thinking. And Siskel and Ebert never did that in theater. I mean, maybe they did from time to time, but they went to a theater. They didn't go to theater to be amused. They went to a theater to think. And I am forever grateful. Now, I'm giving it just credit to them. There were other sources, close friends, and so forth along that process that influenced me to watch movies that made me think and so forth. So there are other credits to give. But I want to just pick two. What are yours, though? I'm actually was less interested in telling anyone that would see this video what my influences are, because I've been thinking about them for years. I'm curious if you've ever thought about it. And I think you should think about it. Who are the people that influenced you that maybe you never gave credit to, or maybe not that they deserve credit, but maybe you can trace your history back a little bit and say, oh, you know, and maybe it can change your trajectories moving forward. Have a good one.